because of their own anxieties about saying or doing the wrong thing and causing lasting emotional damage. So they're also fearful, just as parents can be fearful. When the research, a couple of researchers went to children to find out what they were thinking when they were living with a parent that had cancer. There's a study done by Robinson and James in 2001, and their quote is saying that children have inquiring minds, and inquiring minds seek out answers. And well, what this means is if a parent is ill, the mother is getting chemotherapy, is losing hair, is tired a lot of the time, the child is going to notice that. And if their questions aren't being answered, then they're going to find their own answers. And they can come up with very imaginative, what adults would think of as unexpected answers. And then they're not able to confirm that whether they're actually on the right track or not. The second point is that when Riley in 2003 discovered that when children are not given accurate information, they will create information to complete their own story. And the information that they come up with can cause them to become quite scared because they don't have someone to actually give a sense of reality to the situation and check in with them. And in my practice as a staff nurse working on a palliative care unit, when I'm asked whether a child should be brought into the hospital to visit a relative that is either critically ill or dying, my response is that the child has already noticed the changes that the illness has wrought upon the patient. And by keeping the child away from the hospital when the person is very ill, the child often reasons that what's happening in the hospital must be truly horrific, as opposed to if the child is brought in to visit and supported, it's not scary to them at all. It is extremely sad, but not scary or damaging. I'd like to close this section with a quote that the research shows that Welsh, Wordsworth and Compass in 1996 did a study where they talked to the parents and then they talked to the children about their level of distress. And they got different answers from the children and from the adults. And what they found was that parents appear to be unaware of significant emotional and behavioral problems experienced by their children. And what that is, in essence, is saying is that parents are not good at recognizing when their children are in distress, because the children, noticing that mum is sick, may be on their best behavior. And if the topic isn't being discussed, then the children learn that it's a taboo topic. And it's also important to realize that when mum has cancer, she's dealing with the reality of living with cancer. Her partner, if there is a partner, is juggling the needs of the mum that's sick and also his child's needs. So it's very the child can often be less supported than we would hope for. So although parents are looking to protect and support the child, they're not necessarily able to recognize the child's level of distress and anxiety, and they're not necessarily able to pick up on the cues that the child is giving. And I'm just going to provide a few quotes now, taken from a book written by Phyllis Silverman called Never Too Young to Know, which looks at talking with children about a parent's illness and also about dying. The first quote is from Andrew, who was 12, and he says, "No one told me he was dying, but I could see he was wicked skinny." And the next quote is from Luke, who is 17, and he says, "It was easier for us not to have to imagine what was happening. That would have been worse." I'm going to hand it over to Andrea now to provide strategies for how to have these discussions and how to support children through a parent's illness.
Thank you, Katrina. My name is Andrea Warnick, and I work as a part of a four-person counseling team in Toronto at a center called the Max and Beatrice Wolf Center for Children's Grief and Palliative Care. So we're a community-based program, and we run throughout the city of Toronto, and we work with any family in which a parent or a child is seriously sick or is dying. And probably about 90% of the families we work with is where it's the parent as opposed to the child who is sick and has an illness. We work in hospitals and in homes, and we have kids come down to our center. And while we do counseling, a lot of what we're doing is actually education. Parents come to us all the time, and they say, you know what? No matter how many parenting books I've read, nothing has prepared me for knowing how to talk to my child or my grandchild about my cancer or about death and dying. And that's why we often tell parents that even if you're the best parent in the world, there's no reason why you should know how to talk about these things, because it's not something our culture usually prepares us for. And we've had recently a lot of doctors coming too, and despite all of their medical education and everything, they're not any more equipped in knowing how to talk to their kids than most of the parents that we work with. And so we spend a lot of time doing education with families and with healthcare professionals, a lot of nurses and doctors and social workers and chaplains around how do we support children when there's a serious illness in the family or if someone's dying in the family. One of the things I hear from families a lot is that, it's not the right time to talk to my child yet. Now, my background is nursing, and I worked a long time in pediatric oncology nursing and also in adult palliative care. And quite often I'd be working with families with very advanced cancer, and the children still wouldn't even know that the parent or the grandparent has cancer. And this is what the families would say, well, it's not the right time to tell them yet. And this goes back to what Katrina was talking about, where often our instincts to protect our kids is so strong that it makes it really difficult to see any benefit in sort of shattering their childhood and telling them this really, really hard news. The problem with that, as Katrina talked about, is kids pick up things from their environment. So kids usually know way more about what's going on than we think that they know. Now, often their imaginations are overactive, and they may come up with all kinds of inaccurate reasons as to why the grandparent or the parent has got cancer. But they're certainly aware of that something is going on in the family. They've even shown that young infants who are breastfeeding will pick up a mother's stress just by the hormones in the breast milk. And so even infants, before they have the capacity to understand language, sense when something hard is going on in the family. And that's the same with any child who has somebody close to them who has a cancer diagnosis. Usually they're aware that something really big is happening in the family. But if we don't talk to them about it, they're still in the situation. We're not sparing them from being in the situation. They're just left thinking and wondering about it on their own. And so when parents say to me, well, it's not the right time, I often ask them, well, what do you think the right time will look like? Often what happens is the more time that passes, the more that the child has learned that we shouldn't talk about this thing. And what I see so often is just as much as parents want to protect their kids, kids really, really want to protect their parents too. So often kids don't want to bring up the topic of cancer because they're worried that it'll be upsetting for their parents. Another thing I hear from families a lot is I just don't know what to say to them, or I think I'm going to say the wrong thing. And there isn't one universal right thing to say when talking to a child about someone's cancer diagnosis. The key is really just to be honest and use the right language.